Hey, buddy. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. I hope that everyone out there has a little something to look forward to, someone to love, and something to do. It seems to me that those three things can really pull you through a bad day. Got an incredible guest for you today. But before I get started, I just want to let everybody listening out there know that this podcast and independent media is kind of a tough gig sometimes. And the best way you can do to support people like me or podcast is to just go down in the show notes and hit that little PayPal button right there. And if you can, that would be awesome. No matter how big, how small, your donation totally helps. Now let's get into the incredible guest I have today, Melissa Kwan. She is a CEO and co-founder of eWebinar. She has been in the startup game for over 12 years. eWebinar, I think, is her third company. She's a digital nomad, a bit of an anti-authoritarian, an original thinker, and an incredible person to spend some time with today. So, Melissa, I'm super thankful for you here today. Did I leave anything out on that introduction?
I want you to keep going. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I think that's the best one I've ever had. So feel free to just continue to compliment me.
Well, it's easy to compliment. You have created a life for yourself that is dangerously beautiful. And what I mean by that is that you've been very candid in other interviews where you've spoken about how you got to be where you are. And it hasn't always been roses and rainbows. Sometimes you find yourself at the depths of despair and you find out who you are. So I'm going for dangerously beautiful here. And maybe you can just help people color in that beautiful artwork with a little bit of an origin story.
Yeah. That's I feel like that's a high bar to live up to. Like I want to ask you which part you think is dangerous.
Okay, you want to ask me?
Yeah. Okay. Which part of my journey, do you feel like is a dangerous part and which part is the beautiful part?
Okay. This is a great question. I think the dangerous part is getting to the doorstep of despair. And in some of your previous interviews, you had talked about having to go to people you love the most and ask for help. That's dangerous. Yeah. It's dangerous. I know people personally that I love that have gotten there and decided, you know what, I'm going to check out. I'm out of here. I can't do it because they can't ask and they can't come to grips with this idea of like, okay, I'm not who I thought I was. In fact, I am nobody. I'm nobody. I have nothing. But that danger is where that ember of beauty begins to burn, because that's when you find out who you are, right? Like only there can things begin to develop inside you that will burn bright forever, I think.
I mean, that's like the business devil kind of like knocking on your door, right? I mean, I think everybody has that. And thanks for pointing that out. And definitely, I think it's not unique to me, right? Like many business owners, I'm sure you as well have come across that point in time where you're like, I'm just like not made for this. Everything is hard. Like, why is it so hard? But we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
So actually, I mean, it's probably like the 13th anniversary of me, being in startup world. Previous two startups were also in technology, but in real estate technology. The technology company I'm building right now, eWebinar, is more agnostic, industry, language, geography agnostic, purposely as well. So I'm not like pigeonholing myself into an industry like I did before. But always been bootstrapped. I think that's like kind of my claim to fame. Had some family and friends funding and obviously put in like all my own money, like including taking out loans that I couldn't really pay back for a long time to fund this thing. And of course, like using the best kind of funding as well, customer revenue, to fund these startups. My second company I ran for 5 years and was acquired in 2019, which gave me the capital and the confidence to start, this company. But I didn't sell my previous company for retirement level money. And so I actually had to start eWebinar 2 months after that company was sold because I just didn't want to work forever. And, anything you start, I think it doesn't matter how much experience you have, takes 5 years, right? Like a couple years to conceptualize, get it out, couple more years to, see meaningful revenue, and then probably a couple more years to feel comfortable with it. So I didn't really want to be working forever. And that's why I started eWebinar a couple months after. But that's a company that I'm running now. And I think the thing that I want to mention, and we can get into it as well, is how much more intention I started eWebinar with compared to before, because I had the experience And, really the luxury to think about what I wanted to do next. In my first 10 years, I just did things because I wanted to make money. And I don't mean like that as a bad thing, because I was young and I was hungry and it was all I knew. Like, I didn't come from a family of founders and entrepreneurs. So everything I learned took longer because it was like a lesson that I had to figure out myself. Right. But I was never truly happy with my two previous companies. I was always in survival mode. And there were just a lot of things that I would have done differently. So I was able to, take a few months off and think about like, what is the company I want to start next? And it wasn't, it didn't come from a place of like, okay, what's the product that's going to make most money? It came from a place of, what is the company that's going to give me the life that I love the most? And what is the thing that's going to make me most happy? And that's how I chose the company, the product, the idea, and the people that I work with today. Versus, my previous two was just like, okay, what is the thing that I'm good at? What is the thing that I can sell? And how can I make money? So these are the things that I feel like I'm like a huge advocate for now, like having lived both lives, and how much more content and fulfilled I feel today, even though, starting a company is hard, because everything that I do is now feeding, my happiness versus, the thing that puts most money in my pocket. Ironically, when you do something that you're happy with, you make the most money.
Imagine that.
Imagine that.
It's hard. It's hard to get there though, because we're so conditioned at a young age to think that material gains are what provide us our happiness.
And I come from that culture. Right?
Here.
I'm coming from like a very traditional Chinese family where, you are expected to be a professional, right? Like a doctor, an accountant, investment banker, something really stable, right? And my parents were not entrepreneurs. So I grew up thinking, okay, this is what my path was supposed to be. This is why I was put through university. My dad, like I used to joke that, and it's not really a joke, but I grew up in a shopping mall. Okay. Like other parents would take their kids to like camping and stuff. Like my dad would take us to like shopping malls, and my dad would buy me like Rob Reports, like the luxury magazine, so I could see all the things that I could buy if I had the money to buy it. And these are not like, nice shoes, right? These are like private islands and like giant mansions on like their own islands. So I grew up really in that culture and attaching my self-worth and my success to material things, which I don't think is like, it's not a bad thing to like stuff. Right. Like I like stuff. I like, experiences, but it is bad if your entire self-worth is tied to that thing, because you are then not seeking, validation internally, right? You're waiting for someone to congratulate you on the thing that you have. But that's actually where I came from.
I think it speaks volumes of that. First off, your parents must be incredibly proud of you. They must have seen, you should bring a Rob report to your dad and be like, hey, we got him. Dad, we did it. High five.
I don't think you had the number of years I had to fight my parents because I was doing this entrepreneur thing and I wasn't making any money and I was always poor, and they had to bail me out of my credit card a few times until they didn't talk to me for 2 years because they just wanted me to get over this founder thing so I could go get a job. I think that period of my life was like 10 out of the 13 years. And even when I sold my company, I called my dad and I was like, hey, I sold my company. But they just have no concept. Right? Like people that are not entrepreneurs have no concept of what it means, because my dad would always say, well, if you're doing the right things, if you're successful, why don't you have any money? So their idea was like, you are not taking your life seriously and therefore you have no money. They're not ever thinking, oh, you're really trying really hard at this. And this thing is really hard. And that's why you have no money. It's because you're sticking to it. That's why you burn through all that capital. So they just don't have a concept of that. So even when I sold my company, I was like so happy and I wanted them to be proud of me. But the first thing he said to me was, so exactly how much cash are you going to have in your account? I'm not even kidding you. And I was just like immediately soul crushed, but like also understanding, like at that point I was old enough to not blame them for, not being proud of me in the sense that I wanted them to be proud of me. Like it came from a good place because they just wanted to not take care of me anymore or not worry about it. But that's how little they understand about what I'm doing. But at this point, it doesn't even matter.
You have a great quote that says, if you want to make money, don't be an entrepreneur. And I think that there's something to be said about these incredible feelings of being really liberated when you've just left everything that you have behind, when you're completely in debt, but you're doing what you love. You're like, yeah. And you tell people and they're like, you are a psychopath. You're going to lose everything. I don't know what you're doing. Don't even talk to me. You're cancer right now. Like there's a weird thing happening in there, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that only happens when you're younger, or maybe it's not like an age thing. Maybe it's more like an experience thing, right? Because like I think about who I was in my 20s when I started my first company and then also my second one, and how like blue sky I was and how everything seemed really easy. So I think it's just the way you verbalize and express yourself and the way you feel like you need to tell everyone what you're doing, because in some ways you're seeking external validation. Makes people have that reaction. Nowadays, I'm like, when I meet someone new, I'm like, please don't ask me what I'm doing. Like, I do not want to explain to you. Like, one of my biggest pet peeves is like somebody comes up to me in an event and be like, oh, what do you do? Oh, I have a software company. So what is it? Oh, it's a webinar. So like, exactly what is it? That is just like my biggest pet peeve. But before, I love to talk about myself,
right?
Because I wasn't successful, right? I was struggling and I wanted someone else to tell me that it was going to be okay. All right. So I do think that like part of the reaction that you've just mentioned is just almost a result of how you express yourself.
It's a great point. It's a great point to think about it. It brings up this idea of the mission statement of what eWebinar is. I think it's a great mission statement, and I think it kind of sums up a lot of what we were talking about. Can you the mission statement of giving people their time back, right? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that mission statement, what it means to you, and how it translates into what you're doing with eWebinar.
Yeah. So one of the things that I really wanted in my next company, right after my second one was sold, was like, I wanted to do something that I cared about. And like, it wasn't like I wanted to start a nonprofit, like not that kind of thing. Like I wanted something that was a reflection of me and who I am. And freedom has always been my number one priority. That's why we always had a remote team, never had an office way before it was cool, right? Like I just wanted people to have complete freedom and control over their time and where they lived, because I wanted to live that way. And, so that's number one, is like, I just wanted to do something I cared about. Like in my first two companies, I sold software to real estate agents. I mean, it made me money, but it wasn't something I was like super proud of. Right. And it wasn't something that was a reflection of who I am. Like I went into real estate and real estate technology because that was my experience. It was like one of my first jobs, and it was like where my connections lived, and I knew what to do in that industry, but it just wasn't me. And I think that was a big part of why I was just never fully happy. But I was like too deep into it. It wasn't like I was going to make a switch. But also like the problem of doing the same webinar over and over again. And that's a problem we solve, right? We take any video, we turn it into a webinar, so you never have to do them live. And I'm not talking like one-time recordings like what we're doing now. I'm talking like your demos, your training, like all the stuff that you want to be doing every single day, but you just don't have the brain power, nor is it like, does it make financial sense to do that? So I lived the problem of doing the same webinar every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, for my previous company, because we were always bootstrapped. And so it was just a problem that I knew intimately well. But the reason why it was a problem was because I was already nomading around the world. And I was doing these webinars on like opposite time zones. It got to a point where I would land in a new city and I would go to the hotel or Airbnb, and I would have to test the internet speed like right away to see if I can run this webinar. And if it didn't, I would have to go buy like a portable Wi-Fi or a local SIM card because I had this training that was coming up. So it was actually infringing on my lifestyle and my freedom. And I always hated how I spent so many years earning that freedom that I had finally. But then my freedom, my schedule was completely tied to my customer schedules of when they wanted the training for my software. So I always dreamt up this product that could free me from all these repetitive webinars and just allow me to live my life more. It would give me my freedom back. And this was just one of the things that kept surfacing in my mind is like, why isn't there something out there that's good enough to be me so I can just go and like live my life? So that was kind of where it came, is like, I knew I wasn't the only person living this problem. Like I knew so many different people, so many different founders and entrepreneurs running small businesses like mine that can't afford to hire a team of people like doing trainings for them. And not only did I want to free myself, I wanted to free people like me so that they can grow their business without sacrificing, the quality of content that they were putting out there. So the idea of building something to give people back their time was just something that's so close to my heart. And now that we have the software, like just to give you an idea of scale, like last year in 2022, I did 3,000 demos because people just come to our website, they join a demo. I'm not actually there. And I didn't do a single one live. And I don't have any salespeople. So that's the scale and impact that it can have just on myself. And it's cool to be able to provide that for other people now. Because back then, like when I sold software to real estate agents, they just yelled at me all the time. Like it didn't matter that like, we were putting our heart and soul into creating this like amazing software. Like it was an open house check-in software for them. But now like we actually have people thanking us because, they're going on their first vacation in 2 years because of this, right? I was able to go to Burning Man and disconnect for 9 days because we have this, right? Otherwise, somebody would have to be in my position. So that's kind of where the idea of freedom came from, is like, it's just something that is so close to my heart, but it's also a problem that I live with for many years. And the other thing is, I think a lot of business owners start companies to be free, right? To have their own schedules, call their own shots. But then as the company grows, as your customers become more demanding, they work more in their business because they feel like they need to, or maybe they don't have enough resources to hire people to replace them. And then they forget that, freedom is the primary reason why they started their company in the first place. So a big part of wanting to build this company is wanting to help business owners like myself get back to, why they started this in the first place and making it possible.
Thanks for sharing that. It's amazing. It seems to me that one of the recipes for success, not only in your life, but in other people's life, is just identifying a problem that they have within, solving it, and then making it a pathway for other people to do. It just seems, when I hear about freedom and wanting time back and then creating both a product and a service, like somehow you merge those two things together and allowed people to use that as a pathway forward. Do you think that's part of the recipe, is finding something that you internally struggle with and presenting that answer to the world?
I think that's ideal, right? Like,
sure.
Like, of course that's ideal. Like, wouldn't you love to do something you're good at, that you're passionate about, and then make it a product or a service? But I think while that's ideal, I wonder if that is an earned privilege, because for me that was, right? Like I started 2 companies in real estate because that's where my background was, and my first job was in real estate. And I created a product for the industry that I knew, right? Was I passionate about it? No, but I was sure an expert at it. And it can still be successful, right? So I hate to say like one path is better than the other, because sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. Right. You don't do what you love only. Like that would be amazing if we did. But as an entrepreneur and business owner, you do what is required, especially if you're building assets and building wealth, so that maybe next time around or later on, you can do something you are truly connected to. right? So I don't think it matters which path you take. It's just like, what is the opportunity that's in front of you right now? Like my little cousin he hated school, like absolutely hated school. And he was always so bad at like math and, physics and all that. And my uncle was like, oh, can you talk to him? And this was like many years ago. He was like a teenager and he was like, well, I just suck at it because I hate it. I'm like, dude, like it's so easy to be good at something that you love, right? People that are great at what they do can be really good at what they hate. And because it is just required, right? So I think that really applies to founders as well. Like, yeah, it's great if you find something that you're like an expert and you love, but sometimes that's not always the same thing. And I think that's okay.
Yeah, there's something to be said about finding meaning in something you do. I think it was Viktor Frankl who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, and he talks about being locked away in some concentration camp, but still finding meaning in there. And I think if you can do that, regardless of where you're at, that's what sparks the creativity. And maybe this is a good segue into, there seems to be an interesting relationship between authority and creativity. A lot of times in my life, I've found creative ways to make people in authoritarian positions upset. But I think that same sort of relationship helps you create pathways out of difficult situations. It doesn't have to be authority. But what do you think is the relationship between authority and creativity?
I mean, when you say authority, like what are you referring to? Like who is that authority? Is it like society's expectation, or is it like your boss, your mentor? Like what are you referring to?
When I would say authority, maybe that's a great question. Let's start with the society's limitations, like, or maybe that's your own perceived limitations, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think a really great, example of that, especially in like the startup world, is, if you don't raise money, you're not real, right? If you don't raise money, you're not successful. You're not ambitious, right? You're just like a tiny little mom and pop shop. Like you're insignificant, right? And if you come from bigger, startup cities like, San Francisco, New York, London, like that's the message that you get.
Right.
And that's actually the messaging that I got, when I moved to New York to grow my previous company. I think it is as limiting as you make it. What I had to learn, because no VCs would give me money and I had to still make money. And then eventually we didn't need VC money anymore because we were profitable. So like I saw both sides of the coin, where like, you do a certain pitch, you fit into a cookie cutter, like, slide deck so that you can raise money, and everyone does the same thing, versus like not needing that and then understanding that businesses exist on many different spectrums. Right. So I think it's as limiting as you make it, because when you fit into what society wants you to do, like there is a template for it, right? There is a process for it. It's like, you don't go and make your own slide deck. Like you download them from the internet and it is in a certain order. And then there are organizations, companies like accelerators and mentors that help you make the slide deck to be more templated, so investors see the exact same thing, leading them to fund your company. So I think like if you want to follow a certain recipe, like there is a recipe for success in that realm. But if you remove yourself from that and you say like, actually, I don't care because I'm going to call my own shots and make my own destiny, and I don't need someone else's money, then, the sky's the limit, right? You can do like literally anything you want. And I think that for me is the most inspiring, because I'm a bootstrapper myself. I have a community of kind of bootstrap founders around me, and just seeing the different ways they build their business and the different ways they lead their lives are like, that is what I aspire to, right? Like I don't aspire to, raising a ton of money, hiring so many people, getting on TechCrunch. Like I used to want that, right? Because I needed that external validation. And then you realize how unimportant that is to your success. So I think that's like, but it's not, like I said, it's not like one path is better than the other. Like some people really love that, right? Some people want to raise money and want to hire a lot of people, want a cool office and want to IPO. And frankly, we also need those companies.
Yeah.
Right? Like the Ubers and the Airbnbs, like those are the companies a lot of times that create a fundamental shift in how we live our lives. Right? And so we need those. But most people are not made for that. The problem comes is when they think they are and they try to go that path and they don't know what to expect. And then they've fallen into this thing that they don't love. Right. So I think that's kind of the relationship. But I do think that now when venture capital is much harder and profitability has become cool again, people are starting to be more creative in how they want to live and how they want to build their companies, especially after the pandemic. Because now, like, instead of traveling for work every month, people are realizing, actually, I kind of like staying at home. And that's, fueled, I think, kind of the next generation of founders and business owners and what it means to be a business owner and not fit into, the cookie cutter kind of template that your peers have told you that you need to become.
It's so beautiful. It's so like meta in a way. Like my grandpa used to say, if you want a new idea, read a really old book. And in some ways, it's a pretty good quote, right? Yeah. And in some ways we start talking about, oh, it's cool to be profitable again. And then sometimes we talk about the rule of authority and creativity. Do you see, and then we have COVID come, where everybody's back home, we used to travel. Do you see like this series of pattern that maybe it's not that history repeat, but we're rhyming in a helical model moving upwards in some ways. But do you see a pattern in that particular movement of business and ideas that we're on now?
Yeah, I guess I'm not like old enough to see those patterns, right? But I will say that companies used to only thrive on profit. So just based on that, I think, we're definitely back there. Like, I mean, how old is venture capital? I don't know. Like, is it 30 years, 20 years? I'm not sure. But like, companies used to have to make a profit, and it's not just tech companies, right? It's like your coffee shop next door, right? The vendor down the street. You used to take like manageable loans, not like hundreds of millions of dollars of loans, right? So from that perspective, I think, yeah, we're probably going back to where we started, but I think there's just not so much a pattern, but maybe a shift in control.
I love it.
Right? Like, yes. Like taking back control, like where it's control of my time, of my productivity, of my career, right? Like, the gig economy where you can, be a food delivery driver, on the weekend, but you can also have this other job, or you can be a contractor on Upwork, or you can just, quit your job and be a contractor for your same company. And you're willing to lose those benefits, but then now you can work remote full time. Whereas when you're under them, you couldn't, right? So I think there is a shift in taking control of your own destiny. And that has been made, I guess, possible by technology, right? Like having more transparency, having more ways to pay, having more ways to communicate, right? Having more ways to be in front of someone, or even just asynchronous communication, but having the ability to be in front of someone, but not actually be physically there. And that's, opened up a whole new world of like, if I can have control over my time in my life, like how do I want to spend it? And I think that's all related.
Yeah, that's beautiful. In some ways, it echoes the rapid innovation and transformation we're seeing when people have access to free-flowing information. And you could argue that a lot of what we're seeing now is a freeing up of copyrights, kind of a freeing up of patents when you look at the way AI has freed us to use images and templates. And it's no wonder why we're seeing this rapid innovation. Here's an interesting question. As someone who is developing sort of this Web3 technology and these companies, and as an entrepreneur, it seems like social media has a way of alienating us in a weird sort of way. Do you think that what you're doing on some level makes people more alienated from themselves, or does it open up themselves to be freer to connect with people?
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting question, right? It's like, I mean, when you say alienating, like give me an example of what you're referring to.
So I love talking to awesome people like yourself and all these guests on here. And I find myself in my living room, which is awesome. I got all my books and my map behind me. It makes me feel good about myself. But I'm alienated from the people that I used to spend a lot of time with at the old job that I was at. I'm alienated from my family, and I'm alienated in a way that I have this chamber of people with whom I enjoy speaking, but I am sort of siloed over here in a weird sort of way, and I don't know if I feel it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not so much like social media, it's just technology, right? Like, allowing people to connect without actually meeting in person. I think I can only speak in my perspective, my point of view. I want to be alienated from
Me too.
I want to be alienated from work people, honestly. Right? Like I love talking to you and I love being on podcasts and like I want to be on, some digital based conferences, but I spent 10 years going to conferences and sitting at booths and smiling at people that walk by and trying to get them to like come to my booth. Because because the company that we have a partnership with has it in our contract that we have to fill their conference, hall or whatever. And it's just like the biggest waste of time, but also like super not environmentally friendly, right? This kind of stuff. But it was required and very expensive. So, I mean, I don't want to spend my time with work people in person. So I've chosen not to. And that was actually one of the non-negotiables that I had coming into eWebinar. So I don't think technology makes it such that we're more alienated from people. I think it makes it such that we are able to choose better who we spend our time with, because there are still business conferences I can go to. SaaStr just happened and I could have gone if I wanted to. But I could be more choosy with my time. Right. And I want to spend all my in real lifetime with my friends and family. In fact, like I have a no call, no networking, no conference rule. And people are like shocked by that. But I always say like, it's not personal. I just don't do it. And some people get offended, like 10% of people get offended. And they're like, oh, don't you want to build your business? I'm like, not with you. Because if I want to build my business with you, I would be meeting you. Like how many call requests do we get like every day on LinkedIn? Like, hey, do you have 15 minutes? Like if I gave everybody 15 minutes, I would have no 15 minutes. But unless you are a friend or like a super close friend of a friend, like I don't even take a Zoom call because every time I've done it, I've regretted it. And it just gives me no ROI. And it's different if you're like, hey, I've got this friend. Can you help them do this thing? And can you connect with them? Like, that's a different thing. But it's like, hey, do you want to connect so we can network? It's like, no, I do not want to network. I've networked enough. I've hit my quota of networking. So I think it's beautiful in the sense that it allows us to be more choosy. And that goes back to taking back control. Back then, I had no control because I needed to go to this conference and sit at a booth because it was required of me. And that's how my software was sold. So I needed to do it. Yeah, I didn't have to, but I would have to suffer on my revenue. But that's why I built a company that could be sold, 100% over the internet. That was also one of the non-negotiables that I had. So I actually think technology is beautiful in that way. Yeah. And you can choose who you spend your time with in real life and also, connect digitally. So I think it allows us to like cut out, all the kind of BS and all the garbage that we used to have to do because it was just a thing that we had to go to. I don't know if you like experience the same thing.
I do. I think that the answer to the question, is that really necessary, George? The answer to that question is yes, it's imperative. So I think that all the things that we went through and all like these cardboard cutout middlemen that we needed to have agencies for things. I think that technology is giving people the ability to build parallel economies. And whether that's with your time, whether that's with money or NFTs or whatever you choose to exchange between peer and peer, I think technology is the foundation on which we're building these parallel economies. And you and I can have an economy, and my wife and I can have an economy. And it's really incredibly liberating to understand what that means for you, your family, your loved ones, your time. And I'll give you an example. I was speaking to a gentleman the other day, Israel Wilson, who's we talked a little bit about the Bored Ape Yacht Club NFTs and why they were so successful. And it fleshed out this idea of, imagine a collective of artists and engineers and intelligent, fun people getting together, and we all pitch in $1,000. We have $1,000 token. And I'm like, whenever we have that token, I can call in my favor. Hey, Melissa, here's my token. I really need help with this SaaS product over here. I need your expertise on this. You come into my rescue. Hey, George, I really need help with this podcast over here. These ideas. Boom, I'm coming to your rescue. We've just created this artistic enclave of productive power that will allow us to propel ourselves into the next world. And that's happening right now, Melissa. Like, I see it happening. It's really exciting for me and other people. And I wish more people would get on the technology bandwagon and see technology in AI as this tool that might be, I look at it as like all these old things like the scaffolding on a rocket ship, and they're falling away. And now we're finding ourselves kind of lifting into space a little bit. So that was a long-winded way of saying, yes, I think technology is doing something similar.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going away, right? So
Right.
you can take advantage of it, or you can hate on it, right? And I think the other thing I want to mention, is, I think it does shut out like some relationships, but it also means that you have to be intentional about building relationships. Like, it allows us to build deeper relationships because it doesn't require us to be physically there. Right. Because we're so text-based, we're so asynchronous based. And also, like, I've met a ton of friends that I would call my friends that I would never meet in real life. Like, isn't that crazy?
That is.
Like, I have a community of founders on WhatsApp that, like, we can just throw questions out to. And, it's a pretty tight community of like 30, 40, founders that are like kind of in the same stage. But like, these are people who may never meet in the rest of their lives. And we still communicate almost daily in a way that, like, as if we know each other on our phones. I think that's pretty special. Right. And, you can have one-on-one conversations on, text or whatnot with them as well. And like, and even with my parents, like, I come from a culture where you don't talk to your parents in real life ever. Like, my dad and I used to go into each respective rooms and just email each other. So, because it's just so awkward to have a conversation. And so, like, it's also allowed us to have deeper conversations because it removes the awkwardness of face-to-face. And like, I think there are like bad things about it. Like, people, like, certain people, it makes certain people, I guess, have like digital personalities. So it's probably bad for like online dating if that's all you do. But in a big way, I think it actually fuels a lot of relationships and allows for better communication, because not everybody is great at communicating in real time. Right? You need to think about something and write it down before you hit the send button. And that part about technology and communication, I think, is beautiful and cool.
Yeah, it's a fascinating way to investigate relationships. I think it's Lloyd Lobo who says that relationships are the new currency. And I can't help but see in my own life the relationships I have made that have echoed some of the things you're saying. People I never would have spoken to in my life, where I've been able to ask some questions, and then that starts a relationship, and you're like, son of a gun, I never thought about it from that angle. That's amazing. And it's the emotion was stripped out of it. It was just it's like sitting next to someone on a plane. Like, you have this long conversation with somebody sometimes, you don't even know them, and you just walk away and never see them again. But similar with a WhatsApp group, like, you can have this brain trust of people with whom you're not physically or truly emotionally tied to, and they'll give you their honest opinion. There's something beautiful about it.
Yeah. And I think, like, on the topic of like social currency, I mean, all my startups have been built on favors, right? Like, I mean, I started doing things for people before they were asked for years. And it's not like, hey, George, can you do me a favor? It's like, it just becomes the thing. Like, especially I think as founders, like anyone that's walked the same path is like, okay, this is really hard. And I want to work help other business owners. It just becomes a very natural thing. And the more, like, if you're in this brain trust, the more other people see how, everyone else is helping each other, the more they want to contribute. So I think I think it's investing in relationships is something that needs to be very intentional. But it's definitely something that, you have to give out a lot first without like expecting something in return. But yeah, it's absolutely like the currency.
it kind of like I'm a huge fan of Carl Jung and that particular tree of philosophy. And it's one of the lessons I've taken away from him is that everybody you see is like a mirror of yourself. And it was only a few short years ago that I started really understanding that the people that I despise in daily lives that I would see all the time, like, I hate this guy. I hate talking to this person. Dude, why do I talk to him? The more I realized that person was showing me what I hated about myself, and it was like,
Interesting.
oh, this person is weak. And it was like, I'll tell you a quick story. People may have heard this before, but it's a fun one. So there was this guy at my work a few years ago, probably like 8-9 years ago. And I never got along with him. He was the nicest guy in the world. And he always say nice things, but I always be mean to him. And one of my friends pulled me aside and they're like, George, you're a dick. And I'm like, I'm just busting his balls. Forget about it. I'm busting his balls. I'm like, nah, man, it's over the line. And I remember I came home that weekend and I did a giant dose of mushrooms. And I started thinking, because it bothered me. And I'm like, why am I being a dick? What's my problem? So I started thinking about it. And it hit me like a 1-2 punch. So like the first punch was, I don't like that guy because he's weak. And then it hit me, I'm weak. That guy's showing me everything about me that's weak, and I'm just projecting it on him. Oh my! I had to go and apologize. And be like, I am such an asshole, dude. I hope you forgive me. All these things that I've said, and let me repeat them again. And you can punch me if you want to. Totally mean. I don't deserve this. Like just kind of throwing myself on his mercy. And he just laughed at me. He's like, you are an asshole, George, but you're all right. So, but he forgave me. But it was that moment that I began to realize I should be thanking all the people that I despise. I should be thanking all the people I'm mad at because they're showing you. And I think have you found that that's a language that the universe speaks to you? Like, look at this over here. You can see these lessons everywhere if you're willing to look at them, right?
Yeah, I've never had like a similar experience because the people that I despise and I just don't like being around, I just cut them out of my life. Like, I have no problem just like not being around them. Like, it's just a waste of my energy. So I'm not like, I'm not introspective in that way. Like, oh, why do I like despise this person? And why am I mean to them? I try not to be mean to people.
Right.
But I actively like curate. Like, curation is the key to my life. And now that I'm older, I feel like I just turned 40 like a couple months ago. So I feel like, thank you. So I feel like I've like unlocked another level of discerning.
Totally.
That I could be like, no. It's like, can this person join this group? No. Look, I don't know this person. And like, unless WhatsApp, decides to not announce to everybody that someone's been removed or someone leaves the group, like I can't just like willy-nilly include people in these group chats. Like, I've never met your friend. I know we're going to the same event on the weekend, but I've never met your friend. So curation is like the key to my life. So I do think it's important, right, to like actively cut people out of your life that drains your energy. Like, who has time for that?
Yeah, boundaries, right? This idea that you have to have healthy boundaries, whether it's, work life. How do you navigate that? Was there a time in your life where you had to curate the new boundaries? Like when you talk about going to New York and all of a sudden seeing the way these slides act versus, hey, I don't really need that, but was there an evolution of your boundaries in your career? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think it's all, for me, it's not like I have my work life and I have my life, right? Like, I think the word work-life balance has always been weird to me because it insinuates that you have two lives. I think that the two should be intertwined as a single life, right? If you find something that you truly enjoy working on, like in your professional life, it's just part of your life. And so like, I don't feel like people can compartmentalize who they are. So how I treat my professional life and my personal life is actually very similar. When I moved to New York was probably like my least discerning period of my life because I didn't know what I was doing. I moved to New York from Vancouver. I didn't have any friends. So every person that I met initially was like through one other person. They connected me on Facebook and I'd be that new person like begging people to have dinner with me. And then I went to every single startup event to try to meet people. And then I started this co-living house where I would just hang out with my roommates. So I just met everybody. And because I needed to build a new life in my early 30s where everybody had established friend groups, in a foreign city. So that was pretty hard. But I guess I started to become more aware of how I needed to cut out energy vampires like maybe just a few years ago, right? Like I used to, you know, invite people because because my friend knew that person, even if I didn't like them. But it just drains so much of your energy that it's just, you know, not worth it. So I started to become more discerning in that sense. But I was also then, you know, applying that, I guess, in my professional life is like, there are people that are just sucky, right? I'll give you an example.
Sure.
You know, there are so like one of the types of people that bother me the most professionally are like humble braggers. And they're just out there to make you feel bad, but they're not out there to make you feel bad. That's the result. They're out there to make themselves feel good. And when you are a struggling startup founder like I was for the first 10 years of my life, hearing about how amazing someone is doing, especially in the same conversation where you're telling them you're not doing well, is like the last thing you want to hear. And there's so many of these people that just want to like pat themselves on the back and like let them know, like they're like, oh, I'm working on this really big deal right now, but I can't tell you what it is. But it's going to be life changing. There's a lot of those, especially in big cities. So I've, you know, actively, like these are like energy vampires that I like actively cut out because it just makes me feel bad and it's not productive. So in my professional life, I think that's kind of the path that I'm taking. But now, like I don't have any friends in my social life that are like, you know, that are just work related. I keep those. That is one thing I keep fairly separate. Because, you know, I don't need to make friends with my work. But yeah, I think that's what do you think about that?
It's true. I think that a lot of times people are seeking validation from other people. And again, with my grandpa, the emptiest barrel makes the loudest sound, right? It's just this giant.
Your grandpa's a smart man. You need to have a quote, like a page or a book of quotes from your grandpa.
His fifth wife shot him 5 times. He's an awesome guy. He's no longer with us. Papa Bob, we love you. But yeah, it's true. It's and you can see it. Doesn't matter if you're in a big city, a small town, if you're at your community center or you're at a big event somewhere. The person that's always telling you how great they're doing is probably the most insecure person out there. And if you get too close to them, you're going to get it on you a little bit. So you should probably try to stay away from them. You know. But I've seen that in my life too, and I think it's a strain of illness that infects us. Because if we're honest with ourselves, we all find ourselves wanting other people to see us for the greatness that we think we have inside of us. And I think that the person humble bragging or bragging just hasn't found a way to get people to see him in the way they want them to. So they're desperately trying to, like, hey,
well, it's just our ego, right? It's like everything stems from that, you know?
Yes.
And you know, it's like how, like, I mean, it would be great, I think, if everyone understood that. Because I think we all start with a big ego. Yeah, like that's why we started. That's why we started a company in the first place.
Right.
But it actually doesn't serve us. Like it's the ego that wants to be like validated and wants to be celebrated. And like, you know, there's another type of energy vampire that I caught. It's like the person who's always trying to teach you something. like I didn't ask for this advice. And also like, you haven't walked the path that I'm walking on. Like, and I don't know how to end this conversation, but you need to stop teaching me right now. You know, there's just a lot of those people, or like, you know, they raise a bunch of money and they think like they believe that they've earned this authority to like start teaching you things and like telling you should build your business a different way. It's like, I don't need this right now. But yeah, there's a lot of that, like I guess in the business community, which is why, you know, I actively stay away from that right now.
What do you think is it seems to me that the avenue of lived experience seems to be a much more fruitful environment than the level of the classroom. I'm not saying we don't need both, but it seems to me that if you can speak to someone who has gone through the lived experience, then, and I don't know, I guess sometimes the teachers can have lived experience, but what do you think is when you look at the horizon of education in the future and you look at yourself and other people, you know, who have kind of bootstrapped themselves up and found ways to make things happen, versus someone that's going to school now and trying to learn how to be an executive? Are those just two different paths, or do you see those merging, or you see education kind of falling away in some ways?
I mean, our education system is completely broken.
Totally.
Like, why do we have to learn calculus in high school? I'm not sure. Right? Like, why are we not learning sales and financial literacy and, like the basic things that allow us to make a living? Like, I'm not sure. So I think from that perspective, like our education system has never, like, I don't want to say never because I'm not up to date, has not really been updated to educate us to be independent in life. And that's a problem. Right. And maybe some universities that are more specialized are also doing that. And I think there are certain things that, you must need an education for, like if you're going to be an engineer or, a software developer or a doctor, like, of course. Right. But if you want to be an entrepreneur or if you want to be, in sales, right. Like there's not, like if you want to be like a financially literate person and not take out a whole bunch of loans, like that's not, there isn't much education, I think, that's around that. And I think that's really unfortunate. And I think even if a school offers like entrepreneurship and business, it's like a minor, right? It's like a series of courses. It's not like a major that you take. And right now my partner's son is in university, and his younger son is about to go to university next year. So he's like looking at programs like this, and there's really nothing that allows him to learn what we do. And, that's, I think that hopefully that will change. But I definitely think that, there's a discrepancy between the education that our kids and teenagers and young adults are being taught today versus what is required to build like a fruitful, like rich, like independent life.
Yeah, I wish that in school they would teach our relationship to fear and how to overcome it. How to take risks that make your life worthwhile. It seems to me that at least in the Western school and the public schools I went to was built on this tradition of you sit down and in front of an authoritarian figure, you're trained like a Pavlovian dog with all these bells and whistles, and you got to ask for permission and all these things. But it seems to me if we had a small, and I'm sure if we need money and stuff like that, but I'm just saying it seems to me a better model might be smaller groups and inviting people to talk about their fears and walking towards the edge of the cliffs and, just doing some things where you could show people like, yeah, you could fall right there. What would you do if you did fall?
We're actually going in the opposite direction. I don't know if you know, right? Like there's like, I mean, maybe it's a private school thing, but like my friends' kids, like they removed homework and grades and report cards. And like all the way up to high school. It's like, I forgot the word for this type of education, but I'm like, what if they go to another school where there are provincial exams? Like, how are they going to adjust that? How do they apply for university? Right? Like if they're actually actively removing fear and competition from schools now because they don't want to make people feel bad. Right. And actually like Lloyd Loba and I talk about this a lot is like, what is the next generation going to be when you can't compete, right? When you remove competition, like where is the resilience going to come from? Right. And I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you that every time I've hired a young person, it's never worked out because they've either ghosted me, like ghosted the company and just didn't decide not to show up one day. Or, they come, into a roadblock and they didn't want to continue because, it was too hard. It's insane. So we're actually going in the other direction. And I don't know where, like, I think we're already seeing some of the effects of that, but like, where are we going to be in 5 to 10 years? I have no idea. But I'm like really as an employer, like seeing and really feeling the effects of that right now. And I think it's really unfortunate. And I think it's, I don't know, man. It's just like a function of maybe removing some of that fear, both in the education system and also at home and in society.
Yeah. I think sometimes, what do you think about the relationship between fear and unrealistic expectations? Sometimes it seems to me like the younger generation is like, why even try? Like, how the hell am I supposed to buy this $1 million? I'm 18.
Well, why
this girl's
try
never...
when I could just be an influencer and I could just like sell a photo for $1 million, right?
Right.
Everyone's trying to be an influencer. And some people make it. Actually, like my friend's son, like I think he got into it pretty early, but he was really good at this game. Like he never went to college, but like he just started streaming like himself playing this game, but he was really good at it. And in anything you do, you have to be like the top 0.1%. And he was that person. And then he started like building an audience on YouTube, and like he just now commentates on games, and he is like so successful. And he's like 21 and lives in a group house and has like a super hot model girlfriend, and like he's made it. He's made it, right?
For now.
Yeah, but like this guy has more money than like maybe I can ever accumulate.
Sure.
And he, and it's awesome, right? But
absolutely,
he's one out of like millions of kids that I like actually do it. And, he works hard, and his life is completely in the public eye. But on that note, I've actually lost my train of thought. What were you saying?
We were just talking about fear and relationships and the way in which the world's moving.
Yeah, I think that I almost feel like we've made it okay to stop. How do I phrase this? Like, we've made it okay to not be, I'm trying to phrase this in the right way, to not be offensive. Like, it's okay to let go of your fears instead of overcoming them, if that makes sense. It's like, oh, I have this roadblock. Oh, it's okay. Don't do it then. You know what I mean? Like, and I hate using the word mental health, because I do believe like that's like a real thing.
Right.
But sometimes it's not. Sometimes you just like need to kind of overcome this thing. Like I'll give you an example.
Yeah, please.
My COO was going to have this conversation with this person we hired. And like, we didn't know how to have this conversation with her, because it's like, she wasn't performing. It's been months. Like, and finally he didn't want to hurt her feelings. And then finally he's like, okay, I got to have this conversation with her, because she's just now creating work for me instead of taking it away. And it's hard, right? In a small company, like, it's hard to hire. It's hard to have these conversations. And like, he was like, just kind of leaning into her for like a couple minutes, like letting her know that like, hey, like, you're not really, hitting those expectations. And like, you said you would do this, but it didn't happen. And she was like, I can't have this conversation right now. My mind's just not in a good place. I need to go.
That's so awesome.
This is not the first time this has happened, by the way. So, like, I feel like there's some of like, okay, well, how, but then it's like, well, but then I don't want to not respect them. So at which point are you like respecting, this person that you're working with? And at which point are they weaponizing it? And that's a tough line. But I feel like the next generation is kind of heading that way. This is something that nobody ever talks about, by the way. This is like something that, like, within business owners, like in my group, is like some of the things that we riff about is just like, oh my gosh, like, are you being serious right now?
The weaponization of fragility is a real thing.
I love that. Yeah.
Right?
I love that
true.
word.
You know what it's like? It's almost like sarcasm. Like, sarcasm is a way in which someone with no power can speak truth to people in power without them knowing. So too is fragility a way people can try to get to the people ahead of them without doing anything. Like, and make, it's like this weird sort of wordplay on guilt and emotions and stuff. But perhaps the answer to this is to bring back bullies. Like, the more bullies out there.
Yes.
Hear me out, right?
Yes.
Like, I got beat up by a bully. Like, a lot of times when I got beat up, sometimes, not every time, but a lot of times I was like, I probably deserve that. I was being kind of a dick. I kind of deserve to get punched right there. They didn't kill me. They just punched me in the face. And I'm like, I kind of deserve that. And I'll never forget the first time I ever got beat up, like in 3rd grade. I got a referral. Me and the other kid, my friend Paula and Dono, we had to go to the principal's office. My dad came and picked me up. My dad said, what happened? Well, I got in a fight, Dad. Here's my dad's. Did you win? No. Oh, that was it. That was it. He took me to be a wrestler after that. Like the next week I started wrestling and I wrestled for like the next 15 years. But that was his strategy. My mom's strategy, totally different. Come home. George, what happened? Oh, I got in a fight, Mom. Well, George, you're a year younger than everybody in your class. And you know what? You're not going to be a really tall, large man. And you're going to be younger than everybody for the next 15 years. So if you can't learn to fight with your words and win arguments before they end up in a fight, you deserve to lose. So from that point forward, like I got
you need to learn how to move faster.
Yeah, one of the two. You got to be fast. You're a little guy. You got to be fast. You got to be smart. You got to be quick. You know, you have to be all these things that you're not. But that's what bullies do. Bullies teach you how to overcome obstacles, whether it's the kid that's taking your lunch money, whether it's the kid that's saying mean things to you. And ultimately, I think what happens from the kid that gets bullied is that one day he stands up to that bully and the other kids see that. And then that becomes inspiration for them. Hey, it can be done. No one liked that bully anyway, you know, and there's something that happens when we remove those obstacles from kids at a young age. They no longer have this ladder of ascension. They no longer have this wellspring of courage that will help them make it to the next level. So bringing bullies back. What do you think?
I mean, I think like bullies back then, you know, when you're talking about like taking your lunch money versus bullies now, has like it's just like a whole different vibe. Like people are really mean nowadays. And I actually, going back to our, you know, conversation about communication, is like, while digital communication allows you to build deeper, more meaningful connections, it also allows people to be like pretty nasty.
Yeah.
And then it lives forever. So I think that's where a huge problem is like, even when I do support, like I still do support for my software. Yeah. People are awful. Like they would never say that to me face to face. Like imagine if I was standing like at a cashier in a grocery store, they would never say half the things they say to me digitally.
Right.
And I don't have children like for that reason. I don't want them to like live through this like digital age of having everything live forever and feel like they need to be someone else. And I think it's hard to be a kid nowadays, but I do believe that, you know, we need to teach people how to stand up for themselves in a way that's maybe less physically and verbally violent. But yeah, I don't know where the line is, right? Like with, you know, bullying versus like, you know, teaching somebody a lesson. Because I do think that nowadays, like technology allows us to be like a whole different category of like a bully, and having something live forever on the internet is just like a tough thing to have as a kid. Yeah. Even as an adult. Yeah. You know? Like you have something like bad written about you, like it doesn't go away. Like as soon as an article goes out, like all these sites like start to clone it.
Yeah. It's like a virus in a weird sort of way. It just keeps replicating, right?
But that's what makes people like a totally different like talking track here. That's what makes people so politically correct nowadays.
Fear.
That like it's a bit boring sometimes to have these public conversations because everybody says what they're supposed to say versus, you know, what they really want to say. Right. Which is why having these like kind of closed communities is, you know, inspiring and meaningful because you actually get to say, you know, what you really want to say. You know, and actually Lloyd and I talk about this a lot too. It's just like, you know, you interview someone and, you know, and then they want a certain piece cut out because like the company didn't want that there. And it just makes every conversation kind of similar, right? That's why like, you know, I'm always open and honest because I don't have any investors. Or institutional investors. We have some family and friends investors, but it allows me to say anything that I want.
Yeah, that's refreshing. And I think that brings us to the idea of authenticity, and authenticity as one of the last areas that speaks to people, I think, because it is such a cardboard cutout. There is so much political speak. There is so much of this and that and do's and don'ts with the commas and without the commas, you know, and like, it's just this authenticity is something that I think calls to people. So when you can say what you want, regardless of the company you work for, when you can say what you want, regardless of your sponsors or your investors, I think it gives you a breath of fresh air to everybody. Because I think on some level, everybody wants to say what's on their mind, but they are fearful of it, right?
Well, I mean, I think it matters a lot if you're, you know, trying to grow your company, trying to raise the next round. If you're a public company, like it does matter because what you say has a revenue impact. right? And you are responsible for your, for your shareholders. But that's also one of the reasons why, I wanted to bootstrap. I didn't want to,
Right.
I mean, many reasons, but one of the reasons why it's like, I don't want to invite a boss that just tells me what to do, because freedom is my number one priority. And then a lot of the things I actually write on LinkedIn, like the private message that I get is like, thank you for, being so honest. And, I can really relate to this. There's a lot of like rah stuff that people just don't relate to. It's kind of boring, right? Oh, I've hired like 100 people and I raise all this money and everything's going great. Like everybody writes that. Like you're not writing that for your audience. You're writing that for, perhaps the next investor to see, and then, people to tell you you're great, and then maybe they'll buy from you. So it goes back to your question about creativity.
Yeah.
Right. Like it even goes down to the creativity you're able to express publicly in your writing, right? Is like, if you fit into this cookie cutter, I have to write about things that only make myself look good, which, I think brings a certain audience, but most people I don't think connects with that.
So how do you balance the creativity experimentation with bootstrapping? Like that's, or I mean, I guess you can have that authentic adventure if you are bootstrapping, but how do you must lose some of that creative experimentation if you're taking investor money, right? Like that's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know the other side of the coin, right? Like
right.
I can only imagine, because like if you look at a lot of stuff I never write with my brain. I write from my heart. And that's how I'm able to write, to translate something. Like I don't reverse engineer and think, oh, I want people to think this, I want more people to react. Like I don't know if I put something out there, people are going to engage with it, but I write what I feel like writing. But I could only imagine that if I had someone watching me closely and I needed the next round of money to pay my staff, that I would write very differently. Like I would almost try to manipulate, what I'm writing, because I want them to read it in a different way. Right. So, I'm not a great writer, which is why I need to write like what I actually want, right, versus reverse engineering something. So like, I don't know what the balance is, but I can only imagine just from my own stuff that I write, because I write a lot about my failures and things that didn't work. And I think, people appreciate that a lot more.
There's this trend, it seems, that I see on LinkedIn sometimes where people, I think there's a term for it and I may get it wrong. Apologize to the people that have the right term, but it's something along the lines of like building in front of everyone. Where like you go on and you talk
build
about
in public.
Thank you very much for that. Like this is an amazing trend. I think it leaves breadcrumbs for other people who have ideas or are trying to do things. Like you're fundamentally leaving not only clues, but like actual, like this is, I fogged up right here. Look at this, everybody. Come look how dumb I am. Come over here. Let me show you how dumb George is. You know what I mean? And like, there's something, I find it makes me want to cry sometimes when I see it, because I'm like, that's so beautiful. And thank you for failing right there. Like I'm going to use this in a way that is meaningful. So your mistake actually turned out to be something beautiful for me. And it takes a lot of heart and courage to do that. Right.
Well, people don't want to be alone. Right. And like, actually like the kind of like news that these unicorns put out there, it's like cookie cutter news and posts and stuff. It makes me feel, and probably other people as well, alone. Right. Like I suck because all these other people are doing such great things and raising millions of dollars and hiring all the top talent. And I can't even get my revenue up. Like nobody's going to give me money. Right. So I think when you write about your failures, because everybody fails.
Yeah.
Right. Like how many investors do these people talk to before one investor gives them, a lead investment, and then some other investors follow? Like hundreds. But nobody ever talks about those, right? Because you don't want to be seen as a failure. You can't. So I love putting out content that, is authentic to my experience. I only write about my own stories because nobody can dispute them.
Right.
But it makes people feel less alone. And I love that, right? Because it is such a lonely journey. It was for me too.
Yeah.
Right. Like living in New York, everybody's like, oh, I'm awesome. And you go to every startup event and everyone's telling you how awesome they are and how much money they raise and how, and then it makes you feel like you're not doing very well. And maybe you're not made for this thing. Right. So I think that's what makes what I put out there more authentic, but I also want people out there to know that like what they're experiencing right now is normal, right? I don't know who goes out there and launches a startup and builds it to $1 million in 12 months. It does exist. Absolutely. But if you look at a lot of companies that do that, they've had previous successes. They've also had millions of dollars pumped into it. And they were able to buy revenue through relationships and ads because they had millions of dollars invested. That is not normal. So I actually put posts out there that like breaks down how many months did it take us to get to $1 million, and like from 0 to 10,000, 10,000 to 20,000, like how long it took like for each step. So like, I think that's the kind of stuff that like people want to see.
Yes, yes, and yes. I'm often reminded of this quote that something along the lines of, when the instrument becomes the institution, it no longer has the sharp edge to cut through. So something along those lines. I kind of butchered the end there. But when the instrument becomes the institution, that's when the corruption sets in. And sometimes when we look at the way in which tons of money tries to create the illusion of like a startup. I remember there was a great book by John Kiriakou called Bad Blood. And it talked about the young lady who was going to have this, she had this incredible startup. I think she was a billionaire, or I just remember reading part of the story. And she was going to take one drop of blood. From this one drop of
Theranos.
blood. Theranos.
She is now in jail. I don't know why Adam Newman is not in jail, but she's in jail.
What an amazing story of just like corruption and deceit and all these people behind the scenes, like creating this Steve Jobs cutout lookalike in some sort of way. Like the book,
but those people are psychopaths.
They
like,
all are.
Like actually,
every one of them.
Yeah, and then she like basically like this whole thing broke down, and then she still went to Burning Man like a week later, and like took selfies with her boyfriend, who I guess is like her now husband. I'm like, what is happening right now? I don't know. It's all very weird. But then there's more of those, and that's not the end, right? There's like a similar one, like Frank or something recently, where this like 20-some-year-old like made up this whole customer list, sold it to, I want to say it's like JP Morgan or whatever, like one of these big companies. And then they found out that all the customers were fake. It's like, you have all these Ivy League bankers on staff and nobody figured that out. And then she somehow also like was so crazy that she put herself on their payroll and got herself like $20 million a year in salary or something. It's like, not only did you trick this company, you thought it was a good idea to be on their payroll and stay on their payroll, assuming they're not going to figure this out. Like, you think you're so smart. I don't know. It's so crazy, the kind of stuff that people come up with. But it sucks that this is the world that we live in, because I think it does inspire the wrong things. It makes people feel like, if I can tell a lie, then I will make a lot of money and be successful, right? Like, where do we draw the line? Like Adam Newman, like we were completely crumbled, lost so much money for so many people, and goes out to raise 2 massive rounds for different companies from top investors. What message does this send, right, to founders, right? Like, it doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense.
It just sends the absolute power, corrupts absolutely. I got a family member that investigates corporate security fraud, and some of the stories they tell me is just, it's the same stories like that. It's just mind blowing to see what message is out there and the level of psychopathy. Like, these people are full blown psychopaths on some level, and it's kind of disheartening to hear. But if we switch it back to stuff, I heard a really interesting story one time too. I had a friend of mine that investigates corporate security fraud, and they tracked down this guy who embezzled tons of money from like all his shareholders and all like his employees, like something crazy, like $100 million. And the person tracks him down. They're investigating him, and they're like, they find him, and when they finally get a hold of him on the phone, he's with his race car team in like Monaco or something, and they're trying to grill him over the phone. Like, you son of a bitch. How do you sleep at night? You stole all this money from all these people. What kind of a monster are you? And the person was like, first off, I spent my life building this place. I gave my family, I gave every ounce of my soul, my kids, my wife, my parents, everything I loved is gone. And all I had left was this. And I don't know about you, but you've probably never seen $100 million before. So if you gave up everything in your life and you had $100 million sitting on the table and you were staring down prison, what the hell would you do? Click. You know what I mean? It was like, well, when you put it like that, it doesn't sound so bad. You know what I mean? On some level, you can begin to understand the threads that tie together this thought process of like, just burn the world, man. It's kind of crazy, right?
I mean, I will never know what that feels like.
Me neither.
But I want to kind of bring this back to something that is relevant. Like I grew up thinking I needed that kind of wealth, like really, and not understanding what it is required to get there. Like people that build these massive companies, like yes, there's like a small percent that's fraudulent, but there's a lot that are not. And I don't think people really understand that when you have an ambition like that, that is your entire life. You don't have a normal life, right? You're in the public eye, you don't have relationships, everybody wants something from you. You question all of your friends, right? That's why like when you know someone who's super rich, like they're really weird.
Totally.
Right? They're super guarded, right? Like they're very careful about what they say because who's listening, you know? Like so you have to want it so bad that you're willing to give up everything for it. And I don't know what drives these people. Right? And I had this kind of like come to Jesus moment, I guess, when I was in New York. And like, that's kind of what I wanted to strive for. But also understanding that like, there's a difference between like having ambition and like understanding your capacity.
Yes.
Right. Like they should be aligned ideally. Like your ambition should be a little bit higher, but not too much. If it's too much and you're just completely delusional. And I had a startup that was fine, but it was never going to get to that level. Right. So, and that was my previous startup. So I had this like moment where I was like, okay, why do I want that kind of wealth? Do I want it? Or is it because I was told that that's the right thing to do? So it was kind of a big realization for me to realize that I don't want that kind of wealth because I am not willing to change my life and sacrifice what is required to get there. And that's when, you know, I'm sure everyone's heard this term like lifestyle company, where, you know, investors kind of like paint lifestyle companies as this bad word. And if you want a lifestyle company, you're not ambitious and, you know, you should just go home. But that's when I came to embrace the fact that I wanted a lifestyle company. I wanted a good lifestyle. I want to live and work at the same time. And it wasn't really until I embraced that I became okay with being a bootstrapper and stopped wanting validation and raising capital and wanting to be in the cover of TechCrunch. And that's when I started to meet other bootstrappers and then saw that, oh, you know what? Like if anything between $0 and $1 billion is called bootstrapping, like I'm okay with that. Or like it's called like a lifestyle business, I'm actually okay with that. You know, so like starting this company, when I say I was more intentional about it, I was also more intentional about the goals that I set for myself, right? Like the financial goals that I set for myself to not be like delusional, right? I knew I wanted a company that pays me and everyone involved a good salary, right? Ideally like 2 times market salary. You know, I realize that I don't need to own all the nice cars and boats and airplanes. Like all of that is kind of meaningless, right? Like, and the thing is like with the sharing economy, like you can have a weekend in a castle in Italy and then never see it again. Like how awesome is that? Right? I can drive a Ferrari for a weekend if I really wanted to and never own one and never have to put gas in it and like go service it. So we live in this economy in this world now where all of those luxuries are possible at a fraction of the cost. Right. So, and I think that was like such a relief. You know, that was such a load off my shoulders to not try to get to something that I know I'm not made for. And I think a lot of people are not like that self-aware yet. Right. Because they just like, they have this goal that like everyone wants to get to and they think they want it. But like, do you know what's required? Like, to your point, like people spend a lifetime getting there. And then a lot of times they don't get to enjoy it either.
Yeah. it's the regret. Like, there's a great book by Guy Debord. He's an old French philosopher, and I think the book is called The Spectacle of Society. And in that book, he talks about what we're seeing and what we're living through is this idea of being into having, and having into the illusion of having, into the appearance of having. And it's like, in some ways it's like, oh, and once you start thinking about that all the way through, like, all that's left is just to laugh, because you're like, oh yeah, of course I never had it. Of course it was an illusion, and you just start laughing because you fought so hard for this dream that you wanted to get. And then you realize, like, gosh darn it, I was being so silly. I should have just taken more time to tell this person I love them. I should have just taken a little bit more time to do this other thing, which brings me to this idea. I've been talking to a lot of death doulas lately, and I think this is relevant. And anybody who reads biographies will know this. People in their last days, they don't ever say, I wish I would have worked harder. They don't ever say, I wish I would have had more money. They always say, I wish I would have been a better husband. I wish I would have been a better father. I wish I would have been a better mother. I wish I would have been a better sister. And if we can piggyback on that language, that may help people get to the realization that you just said, that I don't think the picture's just now coming clear in my mind, where you know what it takes to own that dream? It's ridiculous, but you can participate in that dream. And what's the difference between owning and participating in it? Sometimes it's so much more beautiful to participate in somebody else's dream than it is to try to control all of the dream. But I love what you said there. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Like, so David, my partner, he loves to say this one thing, that, like, you love to own stuff until stuff starts to own you. Like, like, everyone's had that brand new car and you don't want to scratch it, so you take up 2 parking spots. Right? Totally. You have this, like, super expensive watch and you don't want to scratch it, so you put your sleeve over it.
Yeah.
Or, like, I love, like, our grandparents, like, they have this amazing leather couch and they, like, saran wrap it.
Totally.
And then you're just sitting on plastic. All this stuff that you own that you like, and then it starts owning you.
Yeah.
And it's so true, like, and someone once told me before, and he was, like, super successful. And he was like, the only people who want all the nice things, like, are the people that don't really have it, right? Like, they want other people to see it. It's not for them, it's for you. And ever since I heard that, I'm like, yeah, you're right. Like, my dad collected watches, and he was one of those people. He, like, on his deathbed, he was just like, oh, I wish I didn't buy so many things. It's like, we've been telling you all these years, because he didn't have stuff growing up. He was poor growing up. So then he wanted to, like, he was like a huge overcompensator for material things. He had all this stuff, all these super expensive watches that he kept in a safe in the bank. He never wore them. And now he left me some of those, and my mom won't let me take it out of that safe in the bank because I don't have a safe at home. It's ridiculous. Right. And, and he would give us these, like, expensive jewelry and whatnot. Like, and I used to wear those things. But as soon as I heard that, I was like, you know what? Like, that's actually true. Like, I used to wear those things because I wanted other people to see it. And ever since I understood that, like, it just didn't really matter to me anymore. And it's so liberating when you stop trying to own stuff, and really, like, what we spend our money on is experiences, and sometimes with our friends. And, like, those are the things that we care about most. Like, we'll spend so much money, like, to go somewhere, travel somewhere, stay in a super nice hotel, go on an adventure. But, like, we won't spend money on, like, material things unless it's, like, our home.
Yeah. In some ways, it echoes the humble bragger and the loudest barrel that we were talking about earlier, right? And you don't even realize sometimes how dear, or I don't even realize how dear I hold some of my ideas until I start looking back on the way in which my parents held their ideas. And in some ways, it speaks to, in some ways for me, it speaks to the idea of patterns and self-responsibility. I guess by looking, so I'm kind of going off topic a little bit right here, Melissa, but in some ways it seems to me that there's a generational pattern that happens to us. And if we as individuals today can look back at the generation that came before us and see what their difficult things were, what they held on to, what they were good at, what they need to work on, if we can look at them as a lens, then we living today can fundamentally change the outlook of those tomorrow. we can radically transform our life by looking at the patterns of the people that came before us and look, oh, they held on to this idea. Maybe I should learn from that. Because too often the patterns that are given to us are just things that we act out and we don't think about. It takes a lot of courage to look back and just share the story that you shared with me. Hey, George, on my dad's deathbed, he held these things. Like that takes a lot of courage to be open and say that about your family. But you can learn from that because you have the courage to think about that from a unique perspective, right? Like I think that there's a lot of people, myself included, that are beginning to see the problems of the people in our past as catalysts for positive change in the future. Is that too deep out there? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can go like kind of one way or the other.
Sure.
You know, like you could be like, I just become my parents, or you could be like, I hate
totally.
the way my parents are. Like my parents are
Right.
such hoarders. I hate going to their place. It is just full of stuff. They refuse to throw anything away. And I think it does come from like this mentality of lack.
Sure.
Right. Like luckily because of them, I didn't live in that. I didn't grow up with that mindset because they provided everything for us. But because of how much I hate how they hoarded everything and don't throw anything away, I became super OCD about throwing things away and like a crazy minimalist and not spending money on things. Right. Like, so I think it can, work both ways. But it's all like, I guess it's all personality based, right? It would be amazing if we all learned from our past and like became better people. But I also want to recognize that like it's just easier to fall into patterns, right?
Yeah. Our patterns, our thoughts become us. They say
my dad was like, if I die, don't throw away my collection of coins. It's like, you want to hoard after you die? Like, I'm not even kidding. Like he like wants to make sure that we do not throw any of his things away. It's like, but you're dead. Yeah, I don't get it, but that's how deeply rooted this goes.
That it is deep. It's interesting to think about the way in which we act out our lives and how so much we may be afraid of today could be something that our great grandfathers or our great grandmothers were afraid of so long ago. Or it could be the fact that they grew up in this depression. So now all of a sudden, like, I don't want to throw away any of the straws I get from McDonald's because I need those. I got to keep this ketchup packet, even though it's like 4 years old.
That person we have to have an intervention for.
It's fascinating to think about. I know. How you doing on time, Melissa? Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Epic. One of my
you did send me an invite, so I have that time blocked.
I know. I'm just checking. You know what I mean? There's an off ramp over there. I always want to point it out to people. You know what I mean? Like, hey, are we doing okay over here? I love this conversation. And I want to take a moment to maybe pivot into this idea of something I'm really fond of. Like, I love the psychedelic experience. And one of the reasons I love it so much is because it's really helped me deal with a lot of traumas in my life. Maybe 10 years ago, my son died. And when I reunited my relationship with psychedelics, it really gave me a new perspective on the way that the world speaks to us, through us. And ever since then, I've been able to kind of use psychedelics to see the world in a different way. It's helped with my relationships. It's really helped me get a better understanding of what I want out of life. And as someone who has recently been to Burning Man, and as someone who may have a relationship with psychedelics, I'm curious to get your thoughts on psychedelics. What do you think?
Yes. I would say yes to all of those things. I mean, I don't know how, like, for listeners, I don't know how, like, much they know about psychedelics. I guess it could be a teacher, but it can also be like just a straight up fun thing.
Yes.
I am not a huge fan of mushrooms. I used to be, but it just doesn't make me feel great. Like physically, it doesn't make me feel great. It makes me feel like super lethargic, but I know the impacts of it. And a funny story, actually, like when I was in New York, someone like gave me this, microdosing was cool back then when I was living in New York. And she gave me this like microdosing bottle that she got from San Francisco from this hippie. I didn't know what microdosing was. I was like reading up on it, and it was like, this stuff was hard to get, like I'm not like, I mean, now I'm more in that community, but back then I had no idea what I was doing. I was curious about it. And she gave me this like microdose droplet bottle. And she was like, oh, I'm going to Israel. I don't want to take this with me. Here, you have it. And one of the first times David and I like did LSD in broad daylight, which is like really the only time you should ever do it, is when I accidentally poisoned us with this dropper bottle. Because I was like, I texted her, I was like, oh, so how many drops do we do? And I was like, I told David, I was like, hey, I was reading a lot about this microdosing thing. Like, do you want to try it this week and see what happens? And he's like, yeah, I'm down for it. And we were not very experienced with this stuff back then. And I texted my friend, I was like, hey, how many drops, do I take? And she was like, oh, like 10. And so I was like, I went to David, I'm like, okay, 10. And he's like, that seems like a lot. And I'm like, well, that's what she said. So we're like in Chile at the time. And like right before we were about to go on this road trip with a friend. And so, I give us like both 10 drops or whatever. I'm on a work call. He's on a call with his son. And all of a sudden he texts me from across the hotel lobby. He's like, I'm getting really high. I'm like, yeah, so am I. And I text my friend. I was like, so how many drops did you say? She was like, yeah, like 10 drops of full dose. So do like 2. So I just like accidentally gave ourselves like a full dose. And at that point, like you're committed.
Guaranteed.
And then the thought crossed my mind that I'm like, if I don't tell him, will he notice? Because I never want to be wrong. Right. So I'm just like,
right.
Like, because but when he was like, oh, 10 seems like a lot. I'm like, no. She told me 10. So it's 10. So anyway, we ended up actually having like the best time because we'd never done this in broad daylight. And apparently it's, it is the only time you should do it. And our friend ended up doing the road trip, driving for us. But that was actually one of the first times that we've ever been on it. But I mean, I think I used to do a lot of like hypnotherapy, receiving it, not giving it. And I think all this stuff like psychedelics, meditation, hypnotherapy, it's a different way to get to the same place, right? If you're not just looking to like have a great time with your friends, which is also great, if that's what you're using it for. But I used to do it, some of the stuff on my own and, put on some music, turn off the lights and see what happens. And I want to say I have had my most creative ideas, in those moments. But I was also able to, and maybe that's the point of this, also able to, in my toughest entrepreneur moments where nothing seems to be working, to be able to strip, my conscious mind, all the doubts and all the fears, and be, I guess, fully in touch with my own ability, if that makes sense, right? Like when everything is against you in your conscious life and you just feel like you're not making it, everything sucks. You have no ability to make this go. And when you're in those moments and you use this as a teacher, you're able to strip all that bullshit away and be like, you know what? Like I am capable because I've done all this other stuff. And I am like, I can overcome this. It is just an obstacle. And someone once told me, like, you can't unlearn what you already know. And if you can align your subconscious mind as much as you can to your conscious mind, you are at your most powerful. Right. And I guess the toughest thing about doing these things is like you forget those things. It's like coming out of a dream, right? You feel a certain way. You feel really powerful in those moments. But as you come out of it, you forget that feeling. So you can be at your most powerful if you allow yourself to remember those feelings and how you got there. And it's almost like going to the gym, right? It's an exercise. And that's why sometimes it's, it's helpful to journal in those moments. It's helpful to record yourself in those moments because you want to remember that you are that person, right? Just because you're on psychedelics and you're not doesn't make you a different person, right? It's just how in touch you are with your own abilities and your power to do what you want to do. Right. So, and that's how I see it, like from a perspective of like creativity and allowing you to be a better, maybe more at peace and a more powerful version of yourself. I think it's an amazing experience. right? And maybe not everybody wants 10 drops at the same time. But start with 2 or 3 and get you there. I mean, like, and that's what I used to do. Nowadays I have a lot less, I guess, time to you know, get into those things. And, you know, living in Amsterdam, like I have a lot of friends that get into like, you know, ayahuasca ceremonies and, you know, those things that like, I don't feel like I'm ready for. It has to call you. Like it, in a lot of ways, like I don't feel like I'm ready to really look at what's under the hood. Like I feel like I'm on a roll, like I'm doing this thing and I don't want to be disrupted in what I'm doing. And I know that like, it's actually supposed to be the opposite of that. But I don't feel like I'm ready for kind of the next level. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on like, you know, how you've seen people kind of use this professionally and maybe how, you know, it's helped you.
First off, that's an awesome story. David sounds like an amazing guy. He's got an amazing girl. You guys sound like an amazing team. I can't imagine. Oh shit, we did 10. You know, on a similar story, I was mixing like a full disclosure. No one should ever do this. This is totally stupid. Don't ever do this. I was mixing up like a gram. I'd gotten like some powdered form of ethlad, which is like a derivative of LSD, and I was mixing it up, right? Because I was going to put it in a liquid form and it was in a powder form. And so you have to research all these ideas like, why does everybody want a drop to be 100 mics? Do you have any idea how difficult it is to take like a crystalline format and put it in and try to distill it down so one drop is 100 micrograms? Like you need a lot of equipment for that. I don't have that. And it's kind of dumb anyway. Like I'm going to take one drop. I have to get like a certain kind of dropper for that. Why don't I make it like 100 milliliters? So I'll just increase the amount of alcohol. And then instead of making it one drop, I'll make it 100 milliliters, right? Because it's way easier to measure. And so as I'm thinking about all this stuff, I'm like mixing and I'm like, and I'm like, I should probably wear gloves. And then as soon as I said I should probably wear gloves, I'm like, my heart just starts thundering. I get like this taste of like blood in my mouth. It's not blood, but like it's all like tinny. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm the dumbest person in the world. I'm touching this. And like, start losing control of like reality a little bit. Like I should just throw everything away. Just get out of here. I start freaking out. And I'm like, okay, just calm down. Calm down, man. It's like 2 a.m. Just calm down. Put this over here. Go lay down for a little bit. And so I laid down for like 3 or 4 hours. And I finally was like, okay, really clean. I feel pretty good about myself. I'm definitely awake. I'm definitely up, but I'm not cuckoo. Okay, let's go back and fix this problem. So I fixed it. But this idea that you can take 1 or 2 drops and have it be a full dose, or you deal with this chemical, it's so power. It has the power to transform reality instantly. And that is something that is spoken about in the spirituality books from here to eternity. It will be spoken about in Buddhist monasteries and Christian churches and, you know, from faiths all around the world. And it's life changing. I'm not saying that people should take this experience lightly. I'm saying the opposite of that. But the powers that come from just one particular incident can fundamentally change the way you see yourself. And much like any environment, if you're going to build a relationship with any of these chemicals, you should obviously do your research. You should talk to people. You should read. You should spend more time in the library than you do using psychedelics, because that's how you learn how to use them. So that being said, I love what you said about the way in which it allows you to remember who you are. It gives you this unique perspective. Almost, for me, it's almost a third person point of view of looking at my life, where I am, where I was, and where I can go. In some ways, it reminds me of Martin Luther King's speech, "I've been to the mountaintop," because I feel like for a moment you get to go to the mountaintop and look down. You can't stay there, but you can go up and you can look and you can be like, oh crap, I started way over there. I was at the bottom and now I'm up here. You know, you get so excited. And then you're like, okay. Where am I going? Okay, I'm going over there. And the trick is to not be, death by astonishment, because everything around you seems so marvelous. But if you can focus in these environments, you go to the mountaintop, you can look where you were. Be excited that you've made it somewhere. Be excited for the progress that you've made, and make sure that you reward yourself for the journey. Look where you are. Okay, where are you going to go from there? If past relevant behavior is the best predictor of future behavior, then understand the trajectory you're on is either a good one or it's one you need to change. But that is very difficult to do when you're conditioned by the daily the daily cycle of life. Get up, go to work, come home, get up. Whenever we find ourselves conditioned by our daily times, it's very difficult for us to see the progress we're on. So for me, I think psychedelics echo what you were speaking about, this ability to transform our lives in a powerful way and present ourselves with who we really are. We're so much more than a race from the hospital to the graveyard. And for myself, for people in my family, and a lot of people I love, it's very easy to get caught up in that rat race. And I think so many people that have creative powers and creative ability and want a better life for themselves, they're caught in that cycle. So psychedelics can be a profound way to get yourself out of that cycle. That was a long rant. I tend to do that sometimes, so I apologize for that. But I'm passionate about it, Melissa.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also like gives you so much clarity about the
Yes.
things that are important and the things that aren't. Like we do a lot of things because we think we have to, or someone told us, or like it's the right thing to do. And when you strip away all those expectations, right, which is really what psychedelics do, you see everything in its purest form. And you're like, actually, I don't care about all that stuff. Like, just stop doing those other things, right? And focus on this thing. And that's a clarity that I love. And before David, like I would do this on my own.
Yeah.
Like I love the self kind of journey of like just going through it on my own. But since I met him, it's become a more social experience because he just can't do anything on his own. Like he literally can't do anything on his own, and definitely not this. So I have my moments where like we are doing this kind of for fun, but I secretly, in my mind, I'm like, okay, this is the answer that I'm seeking. And I don't tell him about it because he just hates it when I like go into my own cocoon. He like feels lonely. So, like, and he's super fun, which is why he needs to be doing all these experiences together. But yeah, it's just every time I do that, and I don't get many experiences or much time now, to go into those things. But every time I come out of it with more clarity and more confidence.
Yeah.
And that reminds me that maybe I need to do it again soon.
Yeah, you totally do. You totally do. Well, you were just recently at Burning Man. I'm sure you were surrounded by people that were living in that environment for quite some time, right?
I mean, Raining Man.
Raining Man.
It's Raining Man. I actually, like, I mean, this Burning Man was so much more about survival than it was about like just going out there and blowing your mind. I would say that I'm more exposed to it just being like in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Like, cause that's just what people do. Like, it's what people care about. And they have retreats. Like they actually have like, retreats that are built for this thing. And they it's like a 3-day thing. It's like an executive retreat. So it's like a real thing there. And every month there's like ayahuasca ceremonies that are like, 10 to 20 people. And there's like shamans and stuff that are like, everything's guided. So it's like done in a very professional way. I've never been exposed to that until like, I didn't think it was like, like an everyday thing. Like everybody accepts it. Like, that's what I mean, until I, went to the Netherlands, but, I think it should be. But yeah, I would say like I'm more educated about that now, not because of, going to Burning Man and those type of events, but actually like living in a country where all of that is like pretty normal.
Yeah. You live in the Mecca right there. There's a great school called, I'm probably going to butcher it, Maastricht University. They just have like, it's like just this giant university of geniuses that go there. And they're doing a lot of work on psychedelics and what the intersection of psychedelics and technology are. In fact, Zeus, if you're listening to this, you should reach out to Melissa because she's awesome, just like you, Zeus. I'll talk to you guys later offline, but he's doing some fascinating work where he's integrating the ideas of the psychedelic experience into augmented and virtual reality. And like you have to talk to this guy. He's so amazing. He grew up with like this voodoo background, and so he's like, when we were talking about this intersection of psychedelics and technology, he's like, what I'm saying, George, is that in the future, you may have to have a substance that prepares your mind for this new experience. Like he talks in such an awesome way. And like, it's just so beautiful and poetic, but the ideas he was talking about are coming from Amsterdam, right where you are. And they're one of the only schools that's actually working with people because they don't have the limits that so many other schools have. You have any thoughts on what the future of psychedelics and technology could be?
I mean, there are so many. I mean, I guess states, provinces, countries that are trying to legalize some of this stuff for like research purpose, at least, right? Or like medicinal purpose. I mean, I think we're a long ways from like the general public kind of accepting that. I think like we've all been brainwashed, with the war on drugs, and we categorize. It's like there's like LSD or like crystal meth,
totally, yeah.
It's just like, what? So those two are like not the same thing. I remember like David was filling out this insurance policy questionnaire, and it was like, have you ever done drugs? And then it's like a list of drugs, and it's like ketamine, heroin. It's like, how are those two things in the same category? Like you check one of these things and you'll never get a policy again.
Totally.
But that's how I think most people categorize it, because it's like Hollywood, right? Or whatever propaganda the news sets. It's like you're like one snort away from being homeless. Don't believe any of those things. I don't know. Like I think that I wish more people would explore this avenue. Not just as a way of understanding themselves, like, which is what we're talking about. Like, it's just for health reasons. I have a friend that's a surgeon in Newcastle, not White Castle. White Castle's the burger joint. Newcastle. And it's in the UK, and there's not much to do there, and people drink a lot. And he was like, I wish I could tell people to stop drinking and just do psychedelics because their bodies are so messed up from how much they're drinking, like in their teens even.
Yep.
Like he's like livers are like 3 times the size, right? Like these people are not going to live past 30. And so I wish that, I think alcohol is the most unhealthy and most dangerous drug, right? Like I drink, socially, but like heavy drinking is like really bad for you. I think probably most people die from alcohol than like
absolutely
like those kind of like soft drugs, right? I don't know anything about heroin. I don't recommend taking it. But those are not the same, right? There's not. I think I wish more people would use it, not just in a way to learn more about themselves, but also like for recreational purpose. But how it's, where the intersection is with that and technology, like I'm actually not sure. Like I'm not really seeing the intersection right now. I think it would be super cool if somehow you could like record your experience. Like I don't know what that would like. That was almost like recording a dream, and that would be epic. Like if you could just like download your experience, or if you could, I don't know anything about science or biology, but like that feeling you get, the one that we're talking about, where you feel powerful and confident, right? Like I wish there was a way where you could record that like biologically and have a way to get there again without going on a 10-hour journey. You know what I mean? Like if it was like a chemical balance thing.
Totally is.
Right? That would be amazing, right? If we could have like a customized drug. It's like the Limitless thing, right?
I love that movie.
If we could have like a customized version of that, because that's our chemical makeup and that's where we want to get to, and that's how we get there, like that would be pretty epic.
That would be amazing. I interviewed this author, David Walton, who wrote a series of books called Living World. And it's a science fiction book about dinosaurs on the earth that communicated through pheromones, and how much better of a language it was than the language we use today in words. And it was a hierarchy of women dinosaurs that ruled the world, and they communicated all through pheromones, but they communicated confidence, they communicated fear. And in some ways it sounds to me like maybe there's something to be said about these pheromones and psychedelic states. And it's fascinating to think about finding a way to record this feeling or this this dreamlike state that you could then be part of or share with other people. In some ways, maybe the drugs are the software and we're the hardware. Like if you look at alcoholism and the way alcohol, look at all the ideas we create running on alcohol. If we look at our species running on alcohol, we come up with a lot of violent ideas, the same way a drunk person wants to fight all the time. But what if we ran on the software of psychedelics like mushrooms or LSD? Might we have something more like the 60s where we ran a little bit more on our ideas radiated love or our ideas radiated creativity, And I don't know. I think on some level we are the manifestation of what we take in. And if we can agree that most societies run on chemicals or drugs derived from plants, we should really stop making alcohol like the very driver of our ideas, because so much of what we're doing seems to not be working. And if that theory worked at all, it'd be much better to be run it on mushrooms or psychedelics or I mean,
we are like, if you're looking at us as like hardware,
okay,
and say drugs is like software that like, changes the hardware. Like we're already doing that through like vitamins or, like I have a friend who's just like a crazy body hacker, and like he studies all this stuff, and like he could go to a 3-day festival and not sleep. Like, I'm not saying like that's like a really good thing, but he like, his whole idea is when you're doing all the stuff and partying and having fun with your friends and taking all the stuff, like your body is depleted of certain things, like certain vitamins. And he has a whole massive like vitamin regimen that he takes before, during, and after. And that allows him to have energy for like 3 days. And like, and to the point where like his gift, in the last festival that we had was like, he made these custom little pouches with like 15 vitamins in them. And he would just like give them to people. So that like,
awesome.
And it works. So we're already doing that in different ways. Right. And maybe one day we'll get there, to change our minds or run our bodies on something like a bit more psychedelic than vitamins. We may never see that day in our lives, but I hope we will.
Yeah, me too. I feel like we live in such an incredible time. And when I think about psychedelics and getting our time back and the creator economy, something that you and I both do, are podcast hosts. You have your own podcast. And I was reading a recent article that you had spoken about the way in which you've harnessed the power of the podcast. You tell the story of, well, maybe I just let you tell the story. Maybe you can tell your story about how you developed eWebinar, your business strategies, and what you think podcasts are today and moving forward.
Yeah. So I did season 1 of a podcast called Profit Led. And the whole idea was, my whole like vibe right now is to let entrepreneurs know that they can bootstrap a company and be successful. And that success is self-defined. Like that is like the whole thing that I'm advocating for. So my season 1 of Profit Led is really interviewing other bootstrap founders and strategists to share stories and ideas of how they've done it. But actually the primary reason why I wanted to start that podcast was because I wanted a side project. Like I wanted like a creative side project that was not related to my software. Because software, I don't know if most people know this if they're not in software, is like, it's not tangible, right? So you're not feeling success for a long time. You're actually just getting into debt for a long time. And I've only started paying myself in the last 2 months, and like not a real salary, and have been doing this for 4 years. So, I wanted something that I could feel success from, that was like a product that was like tangible. And I wanted to learn how to run a podcast on my own. Like everybody was trying to sell me podcast services, and I'm like, I'm just going to learn how to do it on my own.
Yeah.
But they were charging like $1,000 to $2,000 per episode. And I'm like, let me try to figure this out. So that was like the primary reason. And of course, like the secondary reason is like, I wanted to get my name out there, build credibility. Like there is nothing that builds more credibility than a podcast or a video. But the best thing about a podcast is you can listen to it in 2 times speed, in the gym, on the way to work, when you're walking along the street. Like I've always been a consumer of podcasts, and I love how easy it is. And, and it's almost like a low commitment, it's low commitment content. And there's a lot of great content out there.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And of course, like when you hear someone speak or when you see their face, I think it changes that relationship. And we talk about like meeting friends, quote unquote friends, having never met them, like having never meet them in real life. I think podcasting and videos is kind of the best way to do that. So as it relates to my business, that's kind of like, an indirect, marketing channel. And of course I put, an e-webinar ad, in the middle.
Yeah.
But actually along the way, I realize by running this podcast that there's so many business interviews out there. Like, I'm not talking like this conversation we're having because it's like business / lifestyle,
Right.
but like, I invite like a business guru, a tech guru, and I interview them on how they became successful. Like, there's so many out there. And then I realized halfway through this podcast that I was just a number. And I was not as good of a host as all these other hosts. I've been doing it for years. And the reason I also capped it at like 15 episodes is because I wasn't sure if I wanted to commit to it. But at the same time, I was, writing on LinkedIn like 4 to 5 times a week, writing my own experiences, stories of bootstrapping 3 startups. And I realized just from feedback of the content that I put out there on LinkedIn, how little authentic, like real, relatable content is out there about building companies. So actually my next season, which I'm going to start recording soon, is actually about our journey to 1 million.
Nice.
And I'm just going to create our own content. There's no interviews. And myself and my COO, who's actually the first person that started helping me on eWebinar, is just going to talk like about one topic per episode on something that we did. So it could be like pricing mistakes, or like how we came up with the name, or like how do you recruit someone without any resource, right? Or like, customer horror stories, or, how long it took us to get to 1 million. Like every episode will be one specific topic on our journey to 1 million. And I feel like that's actually the content that's missing, not like more tech guru interviews. So that's kind of like, and I actually believe that like most founders, if they don't have any money to spend on marketing, like if they're not leveraging podcasts as like a marketing channel, like a lot of them are kind of free podcasts, then they're missing out on a huge, audience. So actually in the past year, I've been on like 100 podcasts just in the last 12 months. But yeah, I mean, as it relates to my business, I'm actually not sure, like revenue wise. Like a lot of people say like, oh, you do this thing on LinkedIn or you do this thing on podcasting. Like how much revenue do you attribute? Like if I only did things I can attribute
Right.
revenue to, I'd be doing nothing.
Right.
Right. Like it's just, you never know where and when someone's going to hear about you. You can only be there, when they might be there. So I think a lot of my life is like spent on, creating content.
Yeah. I have a unique view, and I echo some of the same things. When I think about podcasting, only recently have I begun to see it not only as a product, but as a service. And when I look at it from that angle, I'm like, it just does so much. It's branding, it's marketing, it is an educational device. Like it's all these things. And if you can get really good at it, I think that those can all be branches that come off of it. You can have this one vehicle. It's like, hey, why don't you get in? I'm going to take you for a little ride over here. I'm going to show you this little educational thing. Or jump in. I'm going to take you over here and show you this marketing part of it. But I think it speaks to the idea of the creator economy and these new things that are beginning to emerge, and the branches of revenue that come from them. Like it's really exciting to think about where we are, and it's kind of the creator economy seems to be at the forefront, like the leading edge of what is possible. Do you think so?
Yeah, I mean that comes back to the idea of control, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And all these creators used to be in corporate jobs and they were really good at what they were doing and they built an audience. A lot of them did it early on, but it's still possible right now. Like the best data start is today. But they're capitalizing on their experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's awesome, right? I love solo entrepreneurs and creators. Like I wish I was a solo entrepreneur. Like I wish I didn't have a company with 10 people, like if I were to do it again, like that's what I would be doing. Like what can I capitalize on? That's just me, myself and I. But I think it's awesome that like technology allows for that. But I don't take that lightly because it is so hard to build an audience. Like if you build it, they won't come, like you have to You have to go and find these people.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how long have you been doing your podcast for?
I've been doing it for 5 years, and I just yelled out into the wind for so long. Like, hey, everybody, look at me. Hey, I got
And
something
like,
cool to show you.
what was your intention for starting it, and how has that changed over time?
First off, thank you for asking. I think my intention at starting it was trying to prove to myself that I'm better than I was, that I'm original, and that I can help people in ways that I'm not doing now. And that resonated with me because I felt like I was wasting part of my life. I felt like I'm really good at this job I was doing. I was a UPS driver for 26 years, and I really enjoyed the communication and the people, but I couldn't. Part of me began to die inside when this new world emerged of COVID and unrealistic production standards, and watching my friends get hurt, and then watching no one stand up, and something began to die in me. And maybe it was something developing inside of me, but it was this need to try and reach out and show people like, hey, I wanted to be the change that I wanted to see in the world. Because I tried to tell everyone, hey, you should do these things with your life, but that didn't work. And so for me, I was like, I gotta be the change. I gotta be the person that does it. So when I started off, it was me just trying to create some change in my life. And the more that I started off with just like some solo rants and investigating magnets and like, hey, watch what this magnet does over here. You know what I mean? And I did some cool experiments where I took some seeds and I tried to grow mushrooms with like seeds that were exposed to the North Pole of a magnet and see if those grow better, just some stuff I would do around the house anyway, but I started putting it online. And then after a while, I started doing book reviews. And then after a while, a PR firm reached out to me and they were like, hey, we noticed you're doing a lot of book reviews. Would you like to talk to one of our authors? And I was like, absolutely. And then that started this new flow of like, all of a sudden, people started reaching out to me from like an Ivy League school, like this, like Joseph Sassoon from Georgetown, like his publisher reached out and was like, would you like to interview Dr. Sassoon? I was like, absolutely. So then all of a sudden people started sending me free books. And I'm like, dude, people are sending me free stuff, man. Telling my wife, they're sending me free books, and then I would read their books, and I would go out of my way to like read their book and have all these notes in the column and be like, okay, no one's ever asked him this question before. I'm going to ask him this question because I bet you this is how his dad thought. And I bet you if I ask him about that, his dad, that'll bring about an idea that maybe he wants to talk about. So I would just go in depth and try to think of things that no one else would ask. And then from there, it turned into, hey, I have like 10 followers, 100 followers, 1,000 followers. And it just kind of snowballed into there. And then it's really, you know what? Listen, you had said something to me in a previous engagement that really speaks to me because you said, George, as a podcaster, as your solo gig, that must be really hard. Like you're the only person out of like 500 people that's ever said that to me. And it is. In some ways, it's believing in yourself when no one else will. But my message to everybody out there is that's what it takes. Just when everybody tells you can't do it, no matter how hard it is, just believe in yourself when no one else will. And I promise you, the world will unfold in front of you the way it's supposed to. So for me, it's transformed into this thing that I do daily. I try to do 8 podcasts a week. I try to package it to the people I'm talking to as a vehicle, as a product, and as a service. And I feel
this is your full time. Like this is it.
This is it. Yeah,
that's awesome.
So,
yeah, not many people are able to get there.
Yeah,
very few. I
get it.
And are you making money off sponsorships or like donations?
I took a second on my house. I've been doing it for 5 years. I took a second on my house about 7 months ago, and I'm pretty much funding everything through that. I do get donations from people, and some people will pay me a little bit for ads, but I had to go get those ads. It wasn't like I sat around and waited for people to get them. Like I have my I got through Transistor, which is my platform, and they allow for dynamic ad insertion. I highly recommend it for people that are looking to do it. But no ads are going to come. You have to go chase down the ads. So if I talk to someone that's doing a book, I'll be like, look, why don't you pay me $50 or $100 and I'll mid-roll it? Or why don't you do this? But the model's out there. If you're willing to create the model, The model's out there for you to create. And especially now in this landscape where it is the creator economy, you can make the rules. There's no set rules right now. So it's kind of this blue ocean strategy where you can, hey, these are the rules. How do you know? Because I made them up. That's why they're the rules.
Yeah. I mean, someone once told me, like, when someone says it can't be done, what they're really saying is, I've never seen it done before.
Or I can't do it.
And yeah, or I can't do it. And I think that's, like, it used to bother me when people say those things, right? But it doesn't anymore because I just don't care what people say.
I love it.
But it also takes, it's like an exercise, right? It's like being in sales. I've been in sales for a long time. So it's like not caring about what people think is a muscle that you need to work out. And it still hurts a little bit, you know? It's just how long you let it impact you for.
Mm-hmm.
And you definitely should not change your own path based on what someone else thinks you're capable of. Because they don't know. They have no idea.
Yeah. And I think that that's where resentment begins to build. When you allow someone else to tell you what you can and you can't do, and you start believing them, that's where the seeds of resentment begin to plant themselves. And
it's hard not to believe them sometimes because you're not successful.
Oh God, I know.
Right? It's like, well, they're just validating what I already think about myself. This is actually one of the reasons I stopped talking to my parents for a while, because they were so negative that I just couldn't have them. Like, I couldn't talk to them and have them tell me that I should just go get a job.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like I've already told myself this many times a day. I tell myself that I can't do it, and then when you check in, you tell me that I can't do it. And that's really tough.
Yeah.
You know, and even if they're your parents, like, sometimes you just have to, like, either you just choose not to talk about that stuff to them, or in my case, I just had to stop talking to them for a while. Like, it was just like, just a negative, dark hole that I was in. But yeah, like, but then for anyone who kind of like triumphs over that, like, it is so liberating. Like, you're so glad that you didn't give up in the moment that you were supposed to, because giving up is the easy thing to do. And that's why most people don't do this. If it were easy, everybody would be doing it and you wouldn't be special.
Yeah. There's a real point where your relationships are called into question. Like, what are you doing? Are you doing the right thing? Who are you doing the right thing for? Is this you want it that bad? Is it you that wants it? Who wants it? You know, like, you have to ask some really deep questions about what's right for you and your family. And, you know, when I look back at some of the decisions I've made, one of the most beautiful things that I tell myself and I see happening is that I don't want my daughter to grow up and be in a position where she has to go work. I can tell her everything in the world, but I don't want her to be in a position. If she wants to work for someone, that's fine. But I want her to be in a position and have somebody who had the courage to strike out and make it on their own, because that's what I want her to do. And if I tell her, you can do it, but I'm not doing it, then I'm sending the wrong message. I want her to see somebody that can do it. And in doing so, even if I go back to doing other things, at least she sees her father, one of the men she loves in her life, following his dreams and his passion. Because that's the kind of guy I want her to be with, you know? And so I think that what we do in our lives. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So yeah, now look at me. I'm talking about my family and ranting about all my personal problems. Thanks, Melissa. It's a fascinating conversation, Melissa. I'm super thankful for all of our time today. Did we cover anything that we did not cover anything that you wanted to cover?
I think we've covered probably a wider set of topics than I thought we would go into. But I guess that's the point of this podcast, right? It's just like, let it flow.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I really, that's the point of the podcast, is just to get to know people and have an honest conversation that people can listen to. And whether they're in the gym or in their car or in their truck or their car, something that people can talk to. I think the real heroes are the people that are out there every day making it happen, whether you're, you know, whatever you're doing, you're making it happen. And I think that these conversations at the forefront are the most important conversations for people to listen to, especially in this time where the pace of change is happening so quickly and that the world is changing all around us. The truth is that the hero is the person that gets up and is out there doing it every day. And people like you, Melissa, you're the hero.
Thank you. Well, I think if you're going to take anything away from this podcast, it's just like, just do you.
Yeah.
Like whatever you want. Like life is so short. Even though it's the longest thing that we have, it's still pretty short because you never know like how many more days are left. And like, don't waste time being in someone else's box if you don't want to. And it is totally okay if you derive joy from that. Like my brother is the complete opposite of me. He has a 9-to-5. He's ambitious within that, corporate realm. He wants certain things, but he won't go out and get it. But that he's okay with it. He, has a wife, no kids. They know exactly what they're going to do every weekend. 2 vacations a year. Like he's very, very structured. He'll probably be happier than I will ever be in my life. But, like he's cool with that. Like he doesn't want to go and like start a company and do his own thing and have a podcast. Like none of those things give him joy. Right. So like the message I want people to take away, really from any conversation is just like, do what makes you happy. Right. If someone comes to you and says you should start a company, like, and that's not what you want to do, don't do it. If you don't want to quit your corporate job, if you love the structure, like, and the security and the benefits, like you should do that.
Yeah.
Because being an entrepreneur is going to take all of that away from you. And some people are just not fulfilled by that, right? Like the thing that I care about is freedom, but everyone defines freedom a different way, right? Freedom to my brother is having, 30 days a year, paid vacation and being able to, do the things he loves every day in the same city and knowing exactly what he's going to do every weekend. Like, I'm never going to understand that, but like, it's totally cool that that's the way he chooses to live his life.
Yeah. And I think Alan Watts has a good part where he talks about, prickles and goo. And he says some people are prickly and some people are goo, but the prickly people need the goo because how do you know what you are, right? Like
those are the exact words I was looking for.
I knew it.
Yeah.
I knew it. But it's beautiful to see the way in which other people live their life because it gives you a window into what you like about your own life and what maybe you don't like about your own life. And so too are those other people mirrors for us and stuff. Do you have any book recommendations, Melissa? Like what are you reading, or do you have any books that people might want to check out?
Yeah. So the book I always recommend, that is not a business book in this, in this context, is The Alchemist. By Paulo Coelho. One of the best books I've ever read. Probably will be the best book I ever read. I've read it like 20 times at different points in my life, and I get something else, from it. But it is the ultimate story of how a boy leaves his home to chase after his dreams and what happens kind of along the journey. And, eventually he gets what he wants, but not after a few obstacles. But it's just beautifully written. It's short, all ages.
Yeah.
And if it's business related, the presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs is the one. Like if you were to never read a business book again, this is the one. Like it is all about, like he didn't write it, Carmine Gallo did, but it is an incredible study of communication and how to align what you want to say with what you want to be heard. And it's a technique that I use not only in business, but also, in my personal life as well. Because I think a lot of times that's where friction comes in, right? What you're saying is not what's being interpreted. And that is, how apparently Steve Jobs sells all his products.
Communication, it's such an interesting thing. And it brings up this other idea that I was talking to some people about recently. When I look at the English language, I see like a letter is part of a word is part of a sentence is part of a paragraph is part of a story is part of a book is part of an encyclopedia. There's this linear fashion that we're taught to speak in. And in some ways, I think that the way we speak is the way we think. And we see so much linear thought of people, I'm going to do this and then this and then this and then this. In some ways, I'm curious to get your thoughts on, do you see us, I kind of see this in this idea of speech being paired with imagery now is kind of evolving our language. And if I'll give you an example, like Adobe Premiere or Canva or any of these AI images, they're allowing you to do text to imagery now. So in some ways, it seems to me that what we're seeing is this evolution of speech happening. And I bring it up because it speaks to the idea of communication. If you and I have different definitions of a word, we can talk all day long, but our definitions are different. Thus, our communication is somewhat hindered. However, if we have images that go along with the words we're speaking, might that convey a more fuller, better message? Is that making sense? Do you see that as a way moving forward with communication and images?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely in like business context.
Yes.
You know, that's why we have PowerPoint,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, right.
And slide decks, right? Like we're visual people, right?
Yeah.
Like I think there's very few things that inspire like emotions
Yes.
than like an image. And actually, like I learned this recently about one of my best friends that she can't imagine. Like there's like a thing, there's like a word for it. Like she can't visualize images in her head.
I can't imagine
that. So she doesn't daydream. Like she doesn't have memories the way that we do. Like if I was like, oh, remember like last Sunday we were here? Like she cannot picture it ever again. It's so weird, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So some people actually like, yeah, she doesn't daydream. She doesn't remember any of her dreams and she can't recall visual memories.
That breaks my heart a little bit.
Yeah, there are people out there like that. So I think that's where it really helps. But I mean, pictures sell.
Yeah. Right. With 1,000 words, right?
With 1,000 words.
It's interesting too, because different cultures have different meanings for words. You know, when we think about obedience or when we think about respect, it may mean different things in different cultures. And so if you don't define your terms right off the bat, people talking past each other or side monologuing, and does that seem to happen in business?
If only images can remove all misunderstandings.
Oh, yeah.
We may never see that day.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If only that could happen.
Yeah, I think you got to mix it with like spirituality and psychedelics, and we might get somewhere. But one day, maybe.
Yeah, back to recording your dreams.
Melissa, this has been incredible. I'm super thankful for your time and got to spend some time listening to what your visions are of the future, how you got to be where you are, what you're excited about. Where can people find you and what do you got coming up?
Yeah, the best way to connect with me is through LinkedIn. So Melissa Kwan, my last name is spelled Kwan. I write daily/weekly about my experience bootstrapping 3 companies. And if you want to check out how eWebinar can help you, your business, free you from those repetitive webinars that you hate doing, just go to ewebinar.com, join our demo. Of course, our demo of the product is our product, delivering the demo. So it's a very meta thing. I manage a chat or, COO, my COO, Todd. But yeah, would love to show you the product and, give you your freedom back if that's your thing. But if you love doing back-to-back live demos or training, whatever, that's up to you as well. Then don't come to my website in that case.
Amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I hope you have a beautiful day. Melissa, hang on one second. I'm going to talk to you briefly afterwards, but I'm going to hang up with our friends here. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Have a beautiful day. Aloha.